Just so happened to, in my viewfinder, catch one of the locals who was just standing around enjoying their hometown. Now this local was not wanting to have their photograph taken, and they thought I was taking a photograph of them. If, like me, you like to keep half an eye on things that are going on in your favourite country that starts with J and ends in Japan, you will likely have seen this is being closed. Bruh. Yes, the local government is erecting a large mesh fence to block the view of Mount Fuji from this particular spot. And why? Well, it's because of us. Specifically, tourists. And further specifically, the badly behaved ones. So yes, thanks to disrespectful foreign tourists, one of Japan's more recently discovered iconic photo spots of Mount Fuji is being blocked, likely forever. And this comes on the back of other measures and restrictions that Japan has had to put in place to help combat the current rampant over-tourism that the country is going through. Things like the Gion district in Kyoto now being closed to foreign tourists because foreign tourists could not respect the geisha, and that as of this year, it will now cost you 2,000 yen, or about £10, or about $12.50, to climb Mount Fuji. And it's not surprising when you read the justifications to why for all of these measures, that a small minority of foreign tourists are just not respecting the rules, dropping litter, being rude, touching people without their permission, all kinds of just awful. Despite that, it's the first thing that you read when you're researching a trip to Japan is to be respectful and polite. And of course, earlier this year there have been the certain issues with various YouTubers who will go unnamed so as to not give them any more fame of breaking practically every law in Japan at every possible opportunity simply to get YouTube clicks. So it does beg the question, are foreign tourists ruining Japan? And in all honesty, it's not a question that me, your humble presenter person that is talking to you now, is qualified to answer. Other than to say, the rude ones, yes, absolutely. It doesn't take an expert to work out that the rude tourists are the one that's making it worse for the rest of us. Because Japan is an incredible country with a culture that matches the landscape with its beauty. It's a country whose identity is so iconic, it's no wonder why the wider world is, I guess you could say, obsessed with the country, and why so many people want to visit it and have an interest in it. Guilty as charged, I'm afraid. But with all of that comes the reminder that when you're visiting Japan or just visiting any other country, it's another country, it's a place where people live and work and have their lives. It's not a theme park. And particularly with Japan, it's a culture that is famous for its rules of being polite, being respectful, and every other rule that they have that their culture and their society abides by at a written or even unwritten level. In fact, to share a story from when I was in Japan last year, when I was visiting Nara, I took a photo of some of the deer in Nara Park. And just so happened to, in my viewfinder, catch one of the locals who was just standing around enjoying their hometown. Now this local was not wanting to have their photograph taken, and they thought I was taking a photograph of them. I was taking a photograph of the deer, I'd framed it badly and included him in the shot. And despite the language barrier, this gentleman asked me to delete the photo. So I came over to him, I showed him my camera, I turned it round, I selected it to delete, showed him me deleting the photo that I had taken. And after I had deleted the photo, the man nodded his head in thanks, and I carried on my way, issuing as many sumasens as I could by way of an apology. Now this was the only tense interaction that I had with a local throughout my entire trip there last year. And it was resolved quickly and amicably with no fuss, no shouting or being rude or anything like that, because ultimately at the end of the day, I was the visitor to Nara. I was the visitor, he was the resident, and he asked me to delete the photo. I deleted the photo. Simple as. There's no question about it. But it was something that weighed very heavily on me for the rest of that trip and almost for the rest of the year, because I've not spoken to anyone about this, even friends and family, since that trip. Like, my wife Lauren was the only person that knows about it because she was with me at the time. I've not spoken to anyone else about it because it weighed so heavily on me, because I'd felt that I'd upset a local, that I had been irritating. I'd been the bad tourist that I have spoken about earlier in this video. That's how heavily it weighed on me. And even though it was resolved without any further issues, I still felt bad about it. But it makes me think, seeing the news that has come out this year alone about the actions of foreigners in Japan as tourists, as YouTubers, as people that are just visiting the country, who are doing things like this and worse, to the point where local governments are having to implement things such as closing parts of their town, charging for going up a mountain, or erecting fences to block views because of the actions of foreign tourists, because people are littering, parking in illegal spaces, and generally being rude and ignoring people when they're being told not to do things. It makes me wonder, who are the kinds of people that are doing this? Like, how do they live with it? How do they, in good conscience, go to a country that's known for all of its rules and ways of doing things and go, you know what? I'm gonna be a bother and do whatever I like because I need that Instagram photo. Who are you? And what I'm getting at here is, apart from ranting at the bad foreign tourists, is it is possible to visit Japan and not be a nuisance. It is possible to have the most incredible time in that country and not annoy the locals. Or it is possible to visit the iconic photo stops, to make your own version of the mass-produced Instagram photos that you see, and not do so in such a way that the local government goes, you know what? No more fun for you. You've ruined it for everyone else. In fact, it's even easier to go to Japan and not be a nuisance. Surprisingly enough. Because my number one tip for visiting Japan is do what the locals do. Act as they do. Walk as they do. Navigate the train stations in the way that the locals do. Japan gets a lot of stick for being a very conformist society, in that everyone is kind of stamped into the same mould as they grow up. Which, rightly so, they do get a bit of stick for, because it doesn't lead to much diversity in people. But as a visitor to the country, that is their culture. That is the way they do things. So if as a visitor you can slot yourself into that conformity as much as possible when you are out and about and interacting with the locals, you will have a much easier time. You will get more respect from the locals because you are trying to assimilate to that culture and act in a way that they will ultimately respect. And I think we can all agree that a friendly local is infinitely preferable to a pissed off, I'm going to build a fence to block the view because of you fuckers local. It's simple advice, but I think it is the most important thing to do. Don't be a dick. So if you're watching this and planning on being a dick, don't. And if you're watching this and planning on being not a dick, and you happen to visit Nara and you see an old gentleman standing by a deer, firstly, don't take his photograph. And secondly, tell him that the photographer that took his photo in 2023 is still sorry for it. And if you have any stories from when you visited Japan of interactions with locals like that, or you've seen foreign tourists being dicks, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear what everyone else has seen when they have visited this wonderful country. And in the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, week, or month, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.